Because of the help I had from the senators in the Democratic Congress, we literally cut the federal debt in half by $1.4 trillion. $1.4 trillion.
And the U.S. national debt has exceeded the limit set by Congress last year. The total public debt reached $31.41 trillion last year. The debt limits the total amount of money the United States government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations. And those include Social Security, Medicare benefits, military salaries, interest of the nation debt, tax refunds, and other payments.
Right now, the U.S. national debt is the highest it's ever been in American history. For the first time ever, the U.S. is now officially over $31 trillion in debt. And it's only getting worse. If you think the national debt won't impact you personally, well, be prepared for a wake-up call. The truth is, as it is right now, more Americans are going deeper into debt for new cars and trucks as vehicle prices remain unusually high. Today, I'll explain how the U.S. incurred this massive debt. I'll also tell you how you're going to be impacted by all this.
Mark my words, December 16th, December 18th.
Today is Tuesday, December 20th.
We're going to get a 3,000-page bill.
The text of the bill, which is more than 4,000 pages long,
that'll been given to us an hour or two before. I know, because this is the way it works every year.
Just unveiled a few hours ago, as a matter of fact.
No one will read it. No one will know what it's in. But what is a guarantee is that it'll add over $1 trillion in debt next year.
We're on a new $1.7 trillion spending bill.
The system is not working. We are not obeying the rules. I brought with me the OMD, 4,155 pages. When was it produced? In the dead of the night, 1:30 in the morning when it was released. Now, people argue that it's conservatives' fault. You don't have the Christmas spirit. Somehow you're holding up government. Well, whose job is it to produce this? The people in charge of spending. The people in charge of both of the parties. When did they know that this would be necessary? Well, it's in the law, September 30th. You got 9 months, almost 10 months, to produce a plan, to have a spending plan. They weren't ready on September 30th, so they voted themselves 90 more days. They weren't ready last week either, so they voted themselves another week. And now we have it at 1:30 in the morning this morning. But what's the clamor? The clamor is to vote. Vote now. Let's get it done. Why are you standing in the way of spending? Well, the real question is this. What is more dangerous? What is more dangerous to the country? $1.1 trillion in new debt, or as Republican leadership likes to say, oh, but it's a win. It's a big win. We're getting $45 billion for the military. So which is more important? Which threatens the country more? Are we at risk for being invaded by a foreign power if we don't put $45 billion into the military? Or are we more at risk by adding to a $31 trillion debt? I think the greatest risk to our national security is our debt. The process stinks. It's an abomination. It's a no-good, rotten way to run your government. $6 trillion entity, and they want 24 hours to process this, and then they want to go forward. I will be demanding 2 amendments. One, that this goes against the budget rules. The pay-go rules say you can't do this. You can't have all this new spending unless it's offset. We will also be demanding that the pay-go rules are increased. Instead of taking 60 votes to evade the rules, we're going to ask that it be a 2/3 vote to evade the rules. The American people don't want this. They're sick and tired of it. They're paying for it through the nose with inflation. Adding $1 trillion to the deficit will simply fuel the fires that are consuming our wages and consuming our retirement plans. It's a terrible system. Someone needs to stand up. We're standing up, and we're going to say no.
America's economy hit a grim new milestone yesterday as the U.S. national debt surged past $31 trillion for the first time in history.
Alphonse D'Amato, former Republican U.S. Senator from New York. He's also a Newsmax analyst joining us live here. Senator, good to see you. You're watching that ticker there, $31 trillion for the first time. Your thoughts?
Scary. It's scary. I mean, we tripled in 13 years. We went from a little over 10 billion, 10.6 billion, to over $31 billion. I have to tell you, the spending during the Biden years, just the 2 years, is really the problem. Interest on the national debt will be the largest item in the budget. Just interest on the debt. I mean, it will exceed defense expenditures. Imagine just the interest, more than what we spend for defense. Believe it or not, more than what we will be spending on Social Security. So the current debt limit expires in December, and hopefully Republicans will take one, if not both, of the houses, and we got to put a stop to this excessive spending. Where are we spending billions? The Green New Deal. Let's spend it in developing energy. Let's encourage us because the interest on the debt alone, if this continues, this growth, you're talking about a third world nation's finances. We're talking about approaching bankruptcy. That's what we're going to be doing. So we have to start redeveloping our own oil, our own natural gas.
Right.
Get away from these expenditures like the Green New.
Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus, in Matthew 21, drove out the money changers in the temple because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada, thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped. How should the banking system work? In an infamous interview, Mr. McGeer asked Mr. Towers, "Can you tell me why a government with power to create money should give that power away to a private monopoly and then borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy?"
Situation. Number of announcements today. First of all, we've got the Office for National Statistics saying that retail sales falling in September after a weak August. The weak August was, I suppose, or part of this is the funeral of the Queen and so on. Apparently, is fed into this a little bit, but nonetheless, consumers now buying less than before the pandemic. Drops were seen across all major areas of retailing, with falling sales, and this is probably the biggest part of it, falling sales in food stores making the largest contribution. So the price of food clearly having an impact. In the meantime, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, saying that 7.8 million people are already finding it hard to keep up with bills. 25% of UK adults in financial difficulty, or could be if they suffered a kind of financial shock. And 4.2 million people have already missed bills or loan payments. But in the meantime, what about the government? Is it missing any loan payments? Well, certainly gathering up plenty of debt. Hasn't decided to miss any loan payments just yet. But if we look at September on the right-hand side there, was at about £20 billion in that month alone. And then if we look at the government debt historically, and this is as a proportion of GDP, and we draw the line across, well, in fact, we're now carrying levels of debt that we haven't seen since about 1963 or so. Patrick, the financial situation continues to tank. Debt levels continue to rise. I'm sure it's not any different in the United States.
Yeah, no, it's not. The U.S. is used to keeping high debt to GDP ratios. For Britain, this is like a new sort of era for Britain. So normally the British, you don't see that type of a gap, 100 or 120 or 130. Who knows where the ceiling is on this for the UK? But they've backed themselves into a huge corner here, and it's a result of what the mad money printing from COVID. You can't wind the clock back on that, unfortunately, and it's having an effect on the currency as well. In the U.S., they're propping up the dollar by raising interest rates. There's going to be a couple of more rate rises, but the bigger geopolitical picture on this from a U.S. standpoint is that the U.S. is able to basically get more countries in debt because a lot of countries had taken massive amounts of loans out or filled up their dollar accounts because the interest rates have been so low for so long. So now that with the rate rise, the Fed is able to basically trigger another round of borrowing because people need to borrow to pay off the previous debt. So there's a compounding debt problem. I'm talking internationally with all the countries that keep dollar reserves in their dollar accounts. So this is one of the ways how the U.S. Manages its financial imperial empire globally, and is through the Federal Reserve interest rates. This is a very powerful tool that the U.S. has to create dependency on the U.S. dollar and debt levels, and they're able to enforce that through things like the sanctions or through military traditionally. So you can see how U.S. power it's a tandem between military preponderance and financial preponderance. You need both. You can't have one or the other. That's the secret to how the U.S. Still manages to be the sort of global hegemon in that sense. But obviously they have a lot more competition now than they did 30 years ago.
Joining us now, Brandon Arnold of the National Taxpayers Union. Brandon, it's so good to have you on. Thanks for spending time with us tonight. Okay, House Republicans on Ways and Means now say Democrats are blocking their probe into the IRS's sudden destruction of 30 million taxpayer documents last year. The Inspector General for Tax Administration found that out at the Treasury Department. The IRS is blaming a backlog mountain of paper. What is going on here?
Yeah, this is absolutely amazing. They found this out back in May of last year, and people like Kevin Brady on the Hill, Mike Crapo, Senator, the head of the Finance Committee on the Republican side, have been hounding the IRS repeatedly, sending them letters, requesting information. There are huge taxpayer implications at stake here, and they've been absolutely stonewalled by the IRS. The IRS is not even turning over a memorandum because they say it might embarrass the agency, as if this agency could be even further embarrassed after all of its missteps over the past several years. It is infuriating.
So the IRS officials never testified in questions and testimony before Congress about the problems with its backlog. It never mentioned that they were doing this. What's the fallout for taxpayers here?
Well, right now there are big implications. We don't know because we have such little information about this. But there are questions about programmatic eligibility, things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit. Are all taxpayers that are getting these credits getting the right amount? It's not clear because we don't know exactly what documents were destroyed. It's not even clear if this process was legal, if the IRS was legally allowed to do so. And again, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Brady have asked them, what is your legal justification for destroying these documents? And it's been crickets. Absolutely no response from the IRS. But this is so frustrating.
We're hearing tax pros are warning there's missing information returns, like 1099s. In other words, 1099 documents were also destroyed. Can that cause a mismatch at the IRS, delaying refunds or even triggering false reports taxpayers are underreporting income and trigger audits? I mean, can it go as far as that?
Yeah, and the irony here is this is the very problem that Democrats were citing when they said we need to give this agency $80 billion to conduct more audits. They were saying people were underreporting income. That is, in fact, the tax gap. They think that they can pay for all of these magical programs using the tax gap. Well, that's based on underreporting income. The way they reconcile those is they look after the filing season. They look at people's 1099 forms and reconcile that with other documents to make sure that the reporting matches up. Once you destroy these documents, they're gone.
Listen,
they're gone, so you can't go through that process.
I mean, having covered the IRS for 2 decades and testifying twice to Congress about IRS reforms and taxpayer rights, I mean, going through IRS offices throughout the country, repeatedly, when Congress neurotically fiddles with the IRS and changes tax laws, it's hard for IRS officials, right? The IRS systems are overloaded. They have online programming software programming problems. I mean, so the issue is this in any way going to hurt taxpayers with more IRS audits?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Look, right when Biden took office, he passed this American Rescue Plan Act. It was a horrible piece of legislation, $2 trillion. One of the small provisions in there was to give the IRS $1.5 billion to modernize its systems, to hire more people, to go out there and fix all of the frustrating problems when taxpayers are on the phone for an hour trying to get a simple response from the IRS. Right at that same time that they're getting all this additional funding, they decide they're just going to delete 30 million tax records. So the whole notion
Do we
that
know
they
if
need
there's
more
backup?
money,
Do we know if those records were backed up electronically? We don't know that,
there's
right?
no indication.
We don't know.
We don't know that. There's no indication
crickets.
that was the case.
Got it, Brandon.
But we need to get to the bottom of it.
Got it. You're terrific, Brandon Arnold. You'll come back.
Operational details. The president still believes that Build Back Better will not add a dime to the national debt.
Correct, it won't.
Why should Americans believe that?
Because it won't. Go ahead.
What if taxes that he says he wants to get more taxes in? What if it doesn't happen? What if the economy goes sour? Lots of things can happen.